crossroads and the overall impact of decision on the health decisions happens if there's a problem, the government can find and then we should online violence against one solution, one cases of stop the revenge which are created for what is said.
What does government's right stop? And can I question?
The Lawful Interception of Communications Regulation, which is quite a mouthful, I think was really disturbing when I read it. I see very overly broad grounds for the issuing of warrants to allow for interception on very vague terms, the commission of prevention or investigation of a crime, and I'm very much looking forward to someone explaining to me how the economic well-being of Nigerians could ever justify surveillance. And I also see serious due process issues in the sense that it's possible for the authorities to basically bypass any judicial check before instigating surveillance activities. So that is definitely something of grave concern.
Passion is inherently and mercilessly human, and as long as in our gorgeously flawed ways we think we have attained that balance, we are assuming divinity, and we're gonna crash like Icarus flaming down the sea. The idea of balance is what came to my mind when we were talking about internet freedom, because there has always been this narrative that we have to balance between security and freedom. We have to balance between collective security and personal privacy. We have to balance between international responsibility with domestic responsibility. And I think sometimes the balance is overrated, because I think it's security and freedom. It's possible to have both. It's possible to have social media working perfectly well and people in Uganda voting and going home and celebrating. Whether you have lost or whether you have won, it's possible to have both. And so I'm hoping that by having this panel, we can see what's possible, what's happening in our countries, but deep down, that is a message I would have wanted to pass across around, I would call it the dead-end preference dilemma, or preference monodichotomy between security and freedom.
We have simply rephrased it or termed it as the spy law or bill. And it's more about interception of communication, postal communication and then telecommunications communications, which authorizes or gives the national security officer the authority to order that a telecommunication packet be intercepted for national security, organized crime, and other related issues, which is currently being debated.
The Gambia is pretty much well known for its being very repressive when it comes to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. But generally speaking, the 1997 Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia guarantees freedom of expression and that through all media, and that includes the internet. However, since 2001, there's been a lot of amendments, and I can't go into details with all of the amendments, of course we don't have the time, but one very important aspect, and that relates directly to internet, is the Information and Communication Act 2009, which was later amended in 2013. This is the only ICT-related law, I mean, directly relating to ICTs and the internet. And among other things, this ICT law specifically states that for merely tweeting or Facebooking or commenting on something that could be described as criticizing public officials or caricaturing public officials, you could be sentenced to up to 15 years in jail or be fined to what is equivalent to US dollars 100,000. That's $15 million if you know the Gambian currency.
This is the law I want us to look at. Cameroon has this law. It's already been passed. You guys you're very lucky in Nigeria. It's been passed, and it literally criminalizes online speech. 6 months to 2 years in jail, and or 5 to 10 million francs for defaulters. The sentence will be doubled if offense is committed within the aim of threatening public order. In fact, if you cannot pay the amount of money, Cameroon government it's okay. They'll just commute it to another number of years, and you will be sentenced to that. The law also imposes intermediary liability on content and service providers, so ISPs, web hosting firms, social networks. It's very, very extensive.
And the other problem is that it depends on the internet service providers. If there is a problem, the government can call them, and they will cut internet immediately for 1 day or 2 or 1 week. You don't have internet access. Simply.
Another survey commissioned and run by PIN in Lagos State found that a percentage of women went to a particular hospital for malaria, right? Now, of that same group of women, when they went online, only about 13 or 12% had looked up anything about malaria.
Women being informed of the opportunities that are online. In Cameroon now, the new phenomenon is that they use a lot WhatsApp, Viber, on the mobile phone because it's what is most closer to them. Not everybody can afford to have a computer or whatsoever. So many young women now, they use WhatsApp and Viber for economic opportunities. Yes. They advertise their products, if they are selling hair products or whatsoever. They use those platforms to express themselves.
One thing I know that the internet has done in terms of politics is being able to see what is obtainable in other countries and knowing that you can advocate for same in your country, being able to push for certain positions, being able to push for percentages, you know, and it was, I've been seeing it in Nigeria. For example, I see people compare previous administrations and present administrations, representation of women, and you say, oh no, for example, when Canada, the new PM of Canada, and they say, oh, look at the guy has half his cabinet are women, and Nigeria, where are you? You know, being able to see what you want happening somewhere else. I think that's the best thing it has done for politics, because we're no more shut out in our own world. We can see what is going on around us. We can push for it.
Going back to the theme of rights online and offline, online violence against women has increased tremendously. We've seen cases of stalking, bullying, revenge pornography. It's almost a trend, and maybe Grace will correct me. In East Africa, it's targeted to women in figures of authority who are otherwise role models for many young girls, but they're the targets of these attacks online. And there is no legal mechanisms in place to safeguard these women's rights when it comes to online violence.
Is that one of the things that the internet has done, or that social media has done, is to be able to tell different stories about political leadership across Africa. So I was 2 weeks ago. I was in Paris. There was Le Monde did a thing on African women, and one of the things is whenever even when you think African women, when you have a Western audience, it's the same stories, like how can we help them, etc. But this was a completely different conversation. I think one of the things, to your point about women from different societies being able to talk to each other, is you had Leymah Gbowee, who is, whenever she's talking, I like to hear her speak, because what she talks about is she speaks directly to the West, and she says, it's not the same sad story. We are our own heroes. We can rescue ourselves. And so I think that's one of the things that's been amazing to me about having cultural conversations across countries, conversations across regions, because we can change the story and change the image of what being an African woman is, what power looks like. And that to me has been incredibly important, and something that, a reason why it's incredibly powerful and critical to save this space as a place where women can continue to share those stories.
So in our study in 2015 of a few, West African countries in terms of internet freedom, what we saw was that there is now an increasing number of bills that seek to regulate or, in quote, address issues around the internet. And unfortunately, many of those bills do not even take care of fundamental rights. As far as they're concerned, they lean towards security. Don't forget, as a continent, we have a lot of trouble as far as crime, insecurity, and even some, countries, terrorism is concerned. So there is a general tendency for security agencies to always talk about, let's find out who is behind that phone. You're in government today, you're in power today, you are in charge today, tomorrow, you'll be an active citizen, or you may be an ordinary citizen, maybe not even an active one. But if you make laws today that will be used against your opponents or the media or active citizens, when, not if, when you stop being in government, it will be used against you, and we will laugh at you. Thank you.
For us to do business and do business profitably, we need to ensure that the right regulations and laws are in place. And we need to be able to work within the boundaries of those laws. There are institutions, private sector or otherwise, who thrive in not having the right regulatory environment. We don't. We increasingly learn that in as much as innovation best happens when there's freedom, the freedom has to happen with the recognition that people have rights that must be respected as well. One of my favorite images when I think of technology policy in government is of two animals. There's a tortoise and there's a jackrabbit. The tortoise is government and policies. The jackrabbit is technology and innovation. Technology and innovation will always be ahead of the tortoise.
It just sums up the need for the declaration. Because governments are increasingly thinking of security, as has been mentioned. So government also thinks that people are abusing their freedoms, so there should be regulation. There should be regulation on security. There should be regulation on crime, cyber crime, and everything should be regulated. But in regulating, are governments considering the rights of the ordinary citizen? Or it's just putting in place regulatory measures that best fit and suit the purposes and the intentions of government. And so the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms becomes so essential in guiding policy formulation in the region.
We are seeing Africa with hope. I mean, the last decade, the hope was kind of focused in Latin America because of many interesting things happening there. Many people going out of poverty, many progressive governments, and so on. Now the hope is kind of gone from there. Europe is less democratic than ever we have seen. US is yet involved in more wars than ever, invading the most countries than ever. And I mean, let's be realistic. This is a young continent that is really at a crossroads. And it's a moment of decisions of Africa. And tough decisions. And decisions of whether you want your internet to be a garden where anyone could plant a seed and grow something to benefit all, or we want your internet to be, like a shopping mall with only those with money can go in and benefit those holding the big bags of money from the banks. You are also at a crossroads deciding whether you can be like consumers clicking, swapping, if you are lucky enough to have access to some internet, or if you want to be creators, coders, and makers of the Africa that you want to shape. I look at this with envy because it is the perfect app. It's an app that doesn't require, like a printer like this doesn't require energy consumption. And it is an app that can empower you more than 10,000 batteries. It is an app that contains a general frame of your human rights in the digital age. It is an enabler of freedom, and it is also an activator of equality.
I think every one of us here, possibly everybody in this country and on this continent, has a knife at home. I think we all have knives at home. There are some homes you go to, you see dozens and dozens of knives. And every once in a while, we hear that somebody has used a knife to kill somebody or to injure somebody or to do some other damage. Nobody has suggested banning knives from homes. Nobody has even suggested monitoring all kitchens to see what people are doing with their knives, how they are using their knives, and so on and so forth. But we all agree that when you use a knife for such a purpose, it is an offense for which you should be punished. I don't think there's any dispute around that. Can we begin to see the internet in such a light?